I need to use the microphone on Thursday nights because many of you might not know this, but we are taping all of our classical conversations in case the people that cannot make it. Give it to the Nashville Symphony for making this available to anybody. One of the staff will come up with this idea. But apparently, because of technology, I need to hold this, otherwise I won't make any sense. It's not that this is going to help a lot, but at least, so testing, 1, 2, 3, probando, 4, 5, 6. I cannot do this in English, I'm sorry. Welcome back to, I guess, would be our official first day of school that I think about. I mean, we had Mahler 8 last couple of weeks ago. How many of you were here, by the way, for that? Wasn't that absolutely special? I have to tell you that for me, yes. I have to tell you that that was one of those moments in my own life and career that was, I mean, I think qualifies as life-changing. Because I cannot begin to tell you as a conductor to get in front of a group of people like that and get to drive a piece of that magnitude. I mean, nothing in my life or in my training could ever prepare me for such an unforgettable moment. And I think having not only an incredible orchestra, but a great concert hall and a great audience to be able to pull this off, I think is the perfect combination. And of course, I forget the chorus and the children's chorus and the singers. I mean, it's just a great combination of everything. And I just, every day that I wake up, I just feel so fortunate to be in such a beautiful place where we can really celebrate music of every style. And then, of course, last week, Boys to Men, and now back to classical. Only in Nashville, you can go to these things, Mahler 8, Boys to Men, Danielpour, Sierra, Rachmaninoff, without getting any whiplash. So with that said, this is another, in my opinion, almost historical evening and weekend, because it is one thing to have one leading composer, but it's quite another to have actually 2 of them. So please help me welcome Roberto Sierra and Mr. Danielpour. I feel like I don't even have to introduce you guys. I mean, you're almost part of the family. I think over the last few years since I became music director, I have been honored to introduce your music to Nashville. More importantly, through recording, which, by the way, those pieces we're doing tonight are actually finalized in the CD project that we're doing. So once this weekend is over, let's get this thing out into the market. An entire CD of music by Roberto, which includes his Symphony number 4, which we premiered a few years ago, Fandangos, and the piece you're going to hear tonight, Carnaval. And in the case of Richard, Darkness in the Ancient Valley, which we premiered last season with the wonderful soprano Vila Plickman, and Lacrime Beati, which was a string piece we did when we were actually displaced out in TPAC, but it's still a wonderful recording. And tonight's music, A Woman's Life, with Angela Brown as soloist. So with that said, Roberto, let's start with you. We're opening the season with a work of yours from called Carnaval, which is from 2009 or 2000?
I believe so. You know, I never remember the dates of the composition. I only know what I'm working on, so I know what is going.
So maybe you need to hold your microphone a little bit closer.
Can you hear me now? Good. I said I don't remember ever dates.
You should remember this, like anniversaries and children's birthdays. You should remember this. You know, you were the one that told me that the compositions are like children that go away. You need to remember their birthday. Now you do. You told me at some point that this, along with the Sinfonia, with the symphony, were actually like sister pieces. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think they belong to a certain, I don't know if to call it style, but type of music I have been writing in the last 10 years, let's say. And the symphony, in a way, culminates that. But Carnaval belongs to that. It's music that is both, in a way, has a strong program behind it, because they have a narrative. They tell a story, but at the same time, they're abstract pieces, so to say. So, for example, in the piece we're going to hear tonight, every movement has a title, and every movement, every title refers to a mythical creature. You have dragons, you have gargoyles, you have unicorns, and it's also an allusion to one of the most wonderful carnavals ever written, which is the one by Robert Schumann. In fact, in the middle of the piece, as a surprise, in the Sphinx is the one with the riddle. And if you don't answer the riddle, I think you get killed. So I didn't want to get killed. So I answered the riddle, but not the one that the Sphinx wanted, which is math. That's the answer to the Sphinx riddle. And the answer is papillon, which is what we hear from the piece by Robert Schumann, and also Sphinxes is based on a very mysterious sort of cipher that appears in Carnaval for piano, which are notes that are meant to be looked at but not to be played. So here those notes form actually the base of this piece. So there you have different levels of both musical allusion, programmatic allusion, things of the imagination, but at the same time, as I say, they reflect abstract way of thinking about music as well.
Also, you talk about mythical creatures, but this is a 5-movement piece where each movement is about 4 or 5 minutes long. I mean, it's a relatively, it moves along very quickly.
It's like a suite of pieces.
It's like a suite. I mean, so it's not really a symphony. I mean, you wouldn't call it a symphony.
It's a suite. It's a collection of pieces.
Okay, almost dances, yeah?
Or character pieces.
Character pieces. I have to tell you, the last one is called actually the Phoenix.
The Phoenix.
And can you talk a little bit about it? I mean, there is actually, I mean, the Phoenix story is actually written into the music.
That's right. Well, it starts even from before, because the one before the Phoenix is the dragon, and you hear actually the sort of almost like you can see the dragon sort of spewing the last breath of air with fire, and ashes are left behind, and you hear at the end with the timpani, you hear the dragon almost like exhausted or falling down or dying, and out of the ashes that the dragon leaves behind, the Phoenix rises up. You hear sort of we're talking about this before, like a almost quasi Middle Eastern, because I think the legend of the Phoenix comes from that era of the world. But my Phoenix is not completely Middle Eastern, because I think it rises in full Latin rhythms. So I think
you cannot speak with Puerto Rican roots.
No, that's your Phoenix. It's my Phoenix. No. That's right.
Well, I think one of the great ways, and please notice, see, it's amazing. I love to do these because I find out things. I've been studying this piece for about 6 or 7 months now, and I just found out now the meaning of the last note of the 4th movement. And you should know that this little breath that he calls.
But you did it beautifully, because it didn't sound like.
No, but now it makes more sense. Now I hope I don't freak out in the middle now that I know that the answer has been given to me. But you should know that along with the timpani doing this glissando with the pedal where disappears, you do something even more magical, which is with the gong, the tampa. Well, you remember the gong show, of course. I remember everything. You actually have the percussionist scrape the gong with a metal beater, which is almost a glissando. So along with that effect, watch the percussion doing something unusual. Remember, if you have a gong, you normally play it, it sounds very big, But in this case, you scrape it with a metal beater, you create this very unique sound. I think it's a perfect way of telling that part of the story of the last breath, almost, which is very special. Yeah. So altogether, all of this music, I have to tell you, it's very colorful, very much like Roberto. And I have to tell you, I said about the thing about the sister pieces, the symphony and this, obviously the fact that they were written almost at the same time, correct?
Well, Fandango comes first,
yeah.
Then a few years later there's Carnaval, and then the last one is the symphony.
Do you think that the Sinfonia and the Carnaval should be played together at some point? Do you think they would complement each other?
I think they would. I mean, it would be fantastic to learn works of my program, because that's what composers want.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, because this is nothing new. Richard Strauss, actually, when he wrote Heldenleben, A Hero's Life, and Don Quixote, he thought of them as complements to each other, and he actually expected both pieces to be played at the same time. Unfortunately, both pieces are so incredibly difficult and demanding of the orchestra that it is almost impossible to do that. I mean, there's very few orchestras that could pull it off without having some sort of a riot in your hands. So when I saw this and you talked a little bit about it, I immediately went back to that idea of Richard Strauss.
Yes, they are companion pieces, but they are played separately, and it's not a problem.
Like the Strauss, they can be played separately, it's not a problem. Now, after Carnaval, we are doing another great piece by, in this case, Richard Danielpour, which was written specifically for the soprano, Angela Brown, who is actually singing this weekend, and this piece is from 2009.
Yes, actually it was composed in 2008 and then premiered the following year in 2009. Sometimes when composers write pieces, it's very hard work, and it ends up really feeling like a job, But once in a while, we have these moments where the entire project becomes a real love fest, a labor of love. And this song cycle was really very much like that for me. Part of it was that the poet happened to be a friend of mine for over 20 years. And not just a friend, but someone who has been for me almost like a spiritual mentor and a surrogate grandmother. And I'm speaking about Maya Angelou. And I remember that when I had this idea for, and Robert Schumann, who you just invoked, had written in 1840, I remember dates, I'm like Rain Man, had written a song cycle called Frauenleben und Leben, which is really the sort of diary of a woman's life, but in relation to her man. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a woman's life American style, but not as the woman relates necessarily to a man, but as she really exists herself. And I knew that Angela had wanted me to write something for her, and she had sung the principal role in my opera, Margaret Garner, and I wanted to give this to her as a way of thanking her for the wonderful work she'd done in the opera. And around June of 2006, I was going to...
There will be a test at the end.
I was going to visit Dr. Angelou, who I hadn't seen for a while, and I'd actually wanted to bring my wife Kathleen to meet her because they'd never met before. We had just been married a little under a year. And I also had this idea for bringing the idea of the song cycle to her. So after, we had some time together, I said, I have this idea about a cycle of a woman's life. Would you be interested in writing the poems so that I can set them to music and give them to Angela, who she had heard about? And she said, I already have them, honey. They're already done. And I said, well, where are they? She said, they're in my collected. I said, where in your collected? She said, they're all dispersed in my collected, but I already have that cycle written. I'll read them to you. So at her dining room table, and she's a COPD patient, so she took the oxygen away from her nose and had her assistant bring her collected. She took these little Post-its and looked at the pages and then closed her eyes and held my wife's and my hand. We were on either side of her, and she read these 7 poems, one after the other, and it was really one of the great performances I had ever experienced in my life. And not only did she read them, but she was at times clapping and stamping her feet. At times, she would break into a song, a fragment of a song. And at times she repeated lines that were not repeated in the text, which gave me permission to do something I never do, which is to repeat lines in a poem. And that was really how it began. She made it very easy for me.
I wonder for a composer, to have that extra level of inspiration almost, it almost, I can imagine it can also be quite a burden. Or did you ever see it like that?
No, because when the poems are great, and when they're naturally, she said that these poems were waiting to be set to music, but she refuses to give permission to composers to do this. And I said, why are you giving it to me? She said, because I found the right one. And she was very sweet about it, and I felt very honored. But the thing that was frightening was when Angela and I came to play it for her 3 years later.
Did you play it on the piano yourself? Okay.
And I was scared. I don't usually get scared in front of people, but I was scared. It was like I was playing for my grandmother. And a very, very demanding grandmother. And we played, and...
Did you play the whole thing?
The whole thing. The whole thing. Without stopping. And she started to cry in the last movement, and at the end she started chiding me, saying that you should never make a grown woman cry in public. This was in her living room, you understand? And she was saying, you must never make a grown woman cry in public. I said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Dr. Angela. She said, I'll forgive you this time. And then, of course, she was wonderful because then we all had lunch, and she said, you know, if I was going to set these as a composer, this is pretty much the way I would have seen them. So we were relieved, and I was so pleased. And she was great with Angela. That same summer, she invited Angela to her house in Winston-Salem. And she went with her mother, and they were going to meet her, and they were going to stay in a hotel. And she said, I'll have none of that. You're going to stay in my house. So, you know, for all of those reasons, it was a special thing to be able to write these.
Now that these songs, there's 7 of them, by the way. Each of them are almost like character pieces. I mean, and Angela takes it, you're in for a treat. And this is something that no recording, I think, could ever capture. We're going to capture the energy, we're going to capture the beauty of the music, but having Angela next to me, while she sings these songs, and literally you can see her transforming, and this transformation from young age through adulthood, it's quite remarkable because they become theater pieces. I mean, she herself becomes each of the characters in each of the songs. Was that something that you intended, or did Angela herself, you said, I just need to do this?
I didn't know how much she was going to act them out, but I knew there would be some of that. What's interesting to mention, and you know, I can say this with these extraordinary musicians on either side, if they understand this. It takes a while for an artist to really make a piece their own. Angela premiered this in Pittsburgh on October 16th, 2009, I believe, with Leonard Slatkin, with the Pittsburgh Symphony. And when she did it the first time, she was singing everything correctly, but it hadn't really been coming from within. You know, she was just giving a good performance. And she said when I saw her this week, she said, I got it, honey. Now I got it. And
I was there, yes.
And she said, and I want you to know, I finally understood what you kept saying to me, because I said, don't do it like opera, don't do it like opera. Do it like Billie Holiday, do it like Ella Fitzgerald, do it like that. It's not opera. And she understood it. It took her a while to process it. And it reminds me of the time that I had just written my first cello concerto for Yo-Yo Ma. It was in '94 in San Francisco. And he looked at me the night of the premiere, and he said, you know, it's not going to be right tonight. He said, it's probably not going to be right tomorrow night either. But he said, I promise you that once it is right, it'll never be wrong again. And that's what happens with performers. It takes them a while.
Today was also a very unique day. By the way, today they actually met for the first time. You have to know.
This was huge. This was huge for me.
And this was, I mean, of course they are aware of each other, but today I was actually honored to be the one that introduced them. Oh, by the way, Roberto, Richard. And more importantly, just by one of those things of fate, Michael Dougherty, another wonderful composer, was actually on his way to Chattanooga, and he stopped by today. So I have to tell you, as a conductor, I even get goosebumps looking out into the audience and having these 3 guys out there. I can just see, when people look at Facebook, I think the Nashville Symphony Facebook page mentioned something of that today. You know, 50 years from now, you say, oh, that day when Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven were hanging around in Beethoven. This is literally what we're doing here. Not only providing a voice, but the fact that we're all hanging out, and because we had these 3 amazing composers. Of course, we were all talking, being very polite to each other, but then we all went into my office, and I wanted to close the door and say, okay guys, now really tell me what you thought about each other's music. And of course, they were being very polite, and then we decided just to trash the other composer who's not here, Rachmaninoff. But with that said, it's a conductor. It's hard for us to find, we don't see other conductors. And we were talking about this today, so maybe Roberto, you're going to talk about this. What is it like for you to hear the music of a fellow composer that you've never met, but yet you're, I mean, how do you hear this from a composer's point of view?
Well, what happens to me is that I try to figure out how that person would be according to the music or because sometimes actually the personality and the music have nothing to do with each other. So you wonder, and then you say, what a wonderful piece of music. I wonder if the person is a wonderful person. Case in point, Wagner.
Yeah.
Yes. A very nice man, but wonderful music. So you don't really. I guess we really never met. We knew about each other since the late '80s. I guess.
Yes, and I've always been. It was such a pleasure for me to meet Roberto because for years I've been a fan of the music of his I've known. I haven't known everything he's written, but I've known enough of it to really be very, very enthusiastic about everything he's done.
And the great thing is that actually, when I met Daniel, I said, well, the wonderful music fits the wonderful person. And that is true, because sometimes I get sometimes, some composers, I don't know if it happens with conductors, you get a little bit allergic. I mean, some
Yeah, conductors can be a pain.
But you know, the fact is that there was an openness and an immediate sort of camaraderie, I guess, because of this very long span of knowing about each other through people that connected us, like the conductor.
Conductors who champion both your music, right?
Exactly. And this is how I heard about your music. This is how I heard about Roberto's music as well. But you know, can I say this? Because
yes.
Upon hearing the Carnaval for the first time all the way through, you know, what the greatest compliment, you know, that one composer can give to another when they hear something is they're listening to something and they think, I wish I'd written that. And when I was listening to the last movement, which I think the entire 5-movement work is just a beauty in every way. I mean, really, truly. I'm not saying this because we're sitting here, but I found it very deeply effective. But the last movement has something very ancient about it, very, very timeless, very, very special. And the way these different layers, which are all discernible, you know, emerge over the course of that movement is really kind of magical, you know. And the thing, and what you do reminds me that as composers, we're not reflecting just life itself. We're reflecting life in a very, very IMAX theater way, you know. It's the big, big blow-up version of life. And you know, this is what I find so wonderful is the imagination. You've created in this piece a world that we can now enter and be happy that we found it.
I mean, this is coming from a composer like that, it was amazing. Now it's my turn to say something. Because, you know, it is indeed, one listens, either you disregard the piece and say, I'm not interested, but, you know, in listening to your piece that I heard at the rehearsal for the first time, actually, you know, I had this sensation, exactly that, those arresting moments of voice writing, and also how the translation of the poetry goes into the music. There is a passage in one of the last, not the last one, that has a descending line that again does that, transforms. It's not just a more musical tone, but something highly poetic. And I had the same sensation. I said, gee, I wish I had written.
Well, the idea of having not only these two composers who are about the same age as each other, you make your home in New York, you make your home in, this is New York State. New York State, you teach at Cornell, basically in the same geographical area. But I think you are not going to find two more different pieces of music in terms of character, of texture, of compositional style, and yet it is from two composers who basically are from who live in the same area, and I think it's a perfect analogy to what America is all about. Why I love to champion American composers, this melting pot that has been happening not in the 21st century, it goes back 200 years. In this era of the 20th century with people like Schoenberg and Stravinsky, and in music and art and science and literature, America provided this perfect place for all of these ideas to just explode. And to have the opportunity in a place like Nashville to present these two very distinct pieces of music and celebrate them, and yet have both composers here, I think is a perfect reflection of what an amazing place America truly is. And somebody who, this is, it's become my home over the past few years, I kind of begin to tell you that this is really the essence of what music making is all about. And I could never think of a better postcard to explain to anybody this melting pot that is the United States of America, and we're truly honored and proud to be the voice for these two amazing living composers.
Well, we are also very grateful for your support. Because these things do not happen by themselves.
Exactly. I was going to say that, you know, we only have a voice with the music we write because of individuals like Giancarlo Guerrero and his wonderful Nashville Symphony. And so, you know, this is something that is truly collaborative in every way. And we are very grateful for it.
Yeah, immensely so. Yeah.
Well, with that said, please, thank you, Roberto. Thank you. Before we agreed that we're going to trash the guy who's not in the room, Rachmaninoff. So let me spend the last few minutes of tonight's lecture speaking a little bit about Rocky III. That is what we call it. There is a Rocky II, and there is a Rocky III. That's the one you're going to hear tonight. It has been dubbed by many people as the most difficult piece of music ever written. And I think quite a few would agree with that. Rachmaninoff, though, will be the first one to tell you that, you know what? Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart, they also wrote very difficult music. Difficult perhaps not in the technical point of view, but difficult from an interpretive point of view. But yeah, this piece is about violence. I think it has become even more part of pop culture because of the utilization of this piece in that movie, Shine, which tells the story of the Australian pianist, kid prodigy, Danielpour, who started a very promising career in his youth, but as he became older, he never lived up to the hype and was actually quite substandard. And this piece basically becomes the reason why he breaks down. He's not able to climb this Mount Everest. The most difficult of pieces, he works on it, and he spends his life on it and tries to learn this incredibly difficult piece and just cannot manage to do it either technically or emotionally. And that causes him to break down. Of course, his story is famous because of the movie. I can promise you that same story is repeated with at least 100,000 other pianists. Because it is frustrating. I have to tell you myself, over my career, I have done these pieces with pianists that truly cannot play it. They think they can, they cannot. A piece that is supposed to be 35, 40 minutes long becomes an hour long. Because everything is supposed to be fast, they just take it very, very slow. And even then, they cannot do it. In the case of Olga, you're in for a treat. This is her party piece. And Olga Kern, who many of you know already, Olga has been coming to Nashville. I'm honored to call her not only a great colleague, but my dear friend. We've done Rocky II before. Last year we did the Shostakovich First Piano Concerto, the Totentanz, and Olga not only has the charisma for the piece, but she has the chops. The piece was written in 1909. Rachmaninoff had actually finished being the music director of the Bolshoi Theater for 2 years. Remember, Rachmaninoff was not only a great pianist, but he was also a phenomenal conductor and quite a good composer. And like most composers, like Mahler, he wanted more time to compose. They had day jobs, either as conductor or as pianist, but they really wanted to write music, and that's what he wanted to do. So the only way that Rachmaninoff could do this was maybe, you know what, I maybe just need to find a job. Now that I have some money, find some small job and just dedicate myself to writing. So he moved from St. Petersburg to Dresden. He and his wife had gone there for their honeymoon and fell in love with the Saxon capital of Germany and decided to move there so he could concentrate on composing. And as he himself will tell you, invitations kept pouring in. He was one of the most famous pianists in the world, and of course, you can hide in Dresden, but still, the telegrams are going to keep coming. But one invitation came that he just could not turn down. An invitation to come to the United States. He was offered a lot of money to come to the U.S. and play recitals, concerts, conduct, basically do a whole tour. Paid a lot of money, And he felt, you know what, this is one invitation that I just cannot turn down. And for the occasion, I want to write a new piano concerto. And this is the piece that he wrote, the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto, specifically for this American tour. He did his American debut in Massachusetts at Smith College. Over the trip on the boat, he had a silent piano that he brought with him, I guess not to bother the other passengers on the boat, and he learned the Third Piano Concerto, kind of with this contraption. The premiere was done by the New York Symphony, which is, I guess, the previous, what used to be the New York Philharmonic. Back then there were two orchestras, the New York Symphony and the New York Philharmonic Society, and then in the 20s they merged and became what we now know is the New York Philharmonic. But back then the New York Symphony was conducted by a man by the name of Walter Damrosch, who by the name, he was the one that also discovered George Gershwin, who commissioned George Gershwin to write his piano concerto. And as a little thing of fate tonight, I chose it specifically. We're opening, of course, opening subscription week. We're opening with the Star Spangled Banner, and the arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner is by Walter Damrosch. So all of these things are connected. In any case, the Third Piano Concerto was premiered in November 28th of 1909 with the New York Symphony, Damrosch conducting it. It was, of course, as you can imagine, with Rachmaninoff, a huge success. People already knew the Second Concerto. By the way, the Second Concerto is from 1900, 1901, so there's 10 years between the two pieces. And we've done the Second Concerto in the past, and some of you might remember my lecture from that concerto, which that piece really came out of depression. So much so that when the First Symphony of Rachmaninoff was written was such a disaster, the conductor was drunk, the orchestra was not prepared, it was just an awful performance of the First Symphony, that Rachmaninoff went into a deep, deep, deep depression, suicidal almost, and he started going to a psychiatrist who was actually experimenting with a new thing, hypnosis. So Rachmaninoff were under, and like very much, I mean, he would like get Rachmaninoff under and would say, you know, you are a great composer. You are going to write great music. The people are going to love it. And you know, it worked because he came out of the depression, wrote the Second Piano Concerto, which is, I think, as popular as the Third, and he dedicated that Second Concerto to his psychiatrist, to Dr. Don. 10 years go by, in 1909 he's coming to the United States. He's in a very different state of mind, fortunately, very optimistic. Actually, in 1909, that same year when he arrived in the U.S., has his debut with the Philadelphia Orchestra, which, by the way, would become a long relationship with that orchestra. He wrote the symphonic stanza for them, premiered the Second Symphony with them, recorded with them, toured with them. He just adored that orchestra, and he had their debut in 1909. Rachmaninoff will also tell you that the premiere with Damrosch didn't go very well, because Damrosch was a very talented conductor. He's not a very good accompanist. And I can tell you, this is one of the most difficult pieces to accompany, because the pianist basically has a lot of freedom. And you have to know this piece intimately, and you're going to see tonight a lot of this. A lot. It is a very free, it is a prima donna piece for the pianist. The piece is dedicated to a pianist, another pianist by the name of Joseph Hoffman, who in Rachmaninoff's mind was the greatest pianist of his time. He was actually younger than Rachmaninoff. Joseph Hoffman actually came to the United States during World War I, settled in Philadelphia, by the way, and when the Curtis Institute opened in 1924, he was the first chair of the piano department. Even Harold Schoenberg, the mighty critic from the New York Times, believed that the greatest pianist of all time was Joseph Hoffman. Horowitz and Richter and other pianists did not quite agree, because they said, this is the greatest pianist you've never heard. Apparently there was this mystical idea of Joseph Hoffman that he himself created, but actually nobody really heard him play. So I'll leave it up to you. If there's any Joseph Hoffman fan club there, I'm not meaning to insult your hero, but this is actual fact. And the piece is dedicated to Joseph Hoffman. He never played it. Apparently, the piece wasn't for him. Most likely, he couldn't play it. It is pretty much a known fact that he couldn't play it. And one of the excuses that are given, and I will tell you, this is the one thing that you need to play this piece. You need huge hands, like Rachmaninoff. And if you do not been blessed with big hands, there's no way you're going to be able to play this piece. And apparently Joseph Hoffman did not have the physical needs to play a piece like this. So for whatever reason, I'll leave it up to you. Go on Google, find your favorite source and see what you can come up with. I personally think it's a combination that maybe the piece wasn't for him, maybe physically he couldn't do it, probably technically there were things that he could not do. The piece is amazing, it's 3 movements. It is the Everest of pianists, for pianists. For conductors, I have to tell you, it's also the Mount Everest. I have done this piece with Olga, but every time we've done it, it's always interesting because there's so much that pianists can do. I have to tell you that for me, yes. I have to tell you that that was one of those moments in my own life and career that was, I think qualifies as life-changing. Because I cannot begin to tell you as a conductor to get in front of a group of people like that and get to drive a piece of that magnitude. I mean, nothing in my life or in my training could ever prepare me for such an unforgettable moment. And I think having not only an incredible orchestra, but a great concert hall, a great audience, to be able to pull this off.